Let your separation season happen. Believe me, I know that you hate being alone, and I know that being alone seems like the scariest thing in the world right now. But what if I told you that this season of separation is going to build you into who God has called you to be? There's a story in First Kings about a man named Elijah. I'm going to summarize the story, but basically, God tells Elijah that there's going to be a drought. He tells him to depart from where he's at and go hide in the Brook of Cherith. Cherith is symbolized as a place of isolation, a place where you are 100% dependent only on God and His resources, where you are cut off from everything that you know. So, this whole entire story that I'm about to tell you is basically about God building Elijah's character. Just like God is trying to do with you, God has to teach you principles before He puts you on the platform. Elijah is getting ready to go do things. He's going to stand on Mount Carmel, he's going to challenge 800 false prophets. God has great plans for Elijah, but He wants to make sure that he's well equipped before doing so. Even further, I know that sometimes you feel like you're the only one that's isolated. You see all of your friends getting married and having kids. You see everybody being financially stable. You see them getting the job of their dreams. And you're like, God, why do I feel like I'm the only one that's like behind? You and Elijah are not the only one. Moses spent 40 years in the backside of the desert. Joseph was in a prison falsely accused and isolated. Joseph went from prison to right-hand ruler. Even Jesus. The story about how all the disciples went and preached and did miracles, and when they came back, the first thing Jesus said was, let's draw aside to a quiet place. Sometimes we get stuck in operating in ourselves. Off of our own works, off of our own wisdom, we try to do things ourselves because of the season that we're uncomfortable in. God knows that you can't operate in chaos. Just like He said, let's go to a quiet place to them, He wants to take you to that Cherith so that you can be isolated, just you and Him. You can't hear God being in a bar every Friday night. You can't hear God laying next to the person that God told you have no business being around. God knows that you hear His voice better when things are silent and there's no chaos, because God is a God that whispers. Even Paul, right after he got saved, he spent 11 years in the unknown. To my knowledge, nothing was recorded that he did anything great. Like, he fell off the grid for 11 years, and I'm sure that that was him building that relationship with God, just purely listening to God's voice. It was 11 years before God told Paul, okay, let's go stand before kings and giants. He didn't just throw him in and say, oh, well, good luck, go do you. God wanted to isolate him and separate him, and that's exactly where Elijah's at right now in the story. Basically, the ravens provided for him morning and evening, and eventually the brook dried up. Now, why would God bring Elijah to a brook that God knew was going to dry up? He was teaching Elijah obedience. Because if you really think about it, it's not like the brook was full of water and then all of a sudden it was empty. Elijah saw his provision dwindling away right in front of his eyes. He watched it go from a big brook to a smaller puddle to a smaller puddle, and then it dried up. But throughout all this, Elijah did not move. Elijah didn't freak out. Elijah didn't abandon ship. Elijah didn't give up. He sat there and said, you know what? I know that I need water to survive, but I trust that God is going to provide it, and He'll tell me when I'm supposed to move. How many of us back out of something because it's like, okay, God, you told me to go here, and now everything's not comfortable. Everything's not exactly how I thought it should be. So I think I'm going to head back because this seems scary. So often we want to pick a different route because the route that God has paved for us seems too narrow for us to follow. John 15:14 says, you are my friends if you do as I command. The whole point is that God doesn't want you to follow His plan for you out of fear, but out of relationship. You have to understand who you serve. You serve beginning and end, Alpha and Omega, the God that turned water into wine, that healed the sick, that performed miracles. You serve a God that you can trust. Sometimes we feel like when God says to do something that it's because He said so, and that's something that your parents struggle with, not that God struggles with. God commands you to do something, that's because you know just as well as He knows that that's the best thing for you. Reading your Bible, including God in your day, building that relationship, all of that is trusting that God is the friend that will always show up. God is not a God that says, I want you to feel guilty. It's, I want you to feel hungry. Just like the ravens brought Him food, has there ever been a time where God didn't show up for you? Maybe He didn't give you what you wanted when you expected it, but genuinely, thinking of the things that you need, has there ever been a time where God hasn't shown up for you? Matthew 6, don't worry about what you're going to eat and what you're going to wear, because if I take care of the flowers and the birds, I love you so much more than that. God has got you. God led Elijah into a Cherith season so that he could learn to depend on God. Fun fact that the raven is a bird that's considered dirty. We serve a God that can use the unclean to cleanse. So everything that you look down on, people, environments, jobs, situations, etc., God can use the unclean to clean you. And if you're the unclean, God can use you to clean somebody else. He's God. Thought that was cool. We're at the point in the story where the brook has now dried up. Verse 7 says the brook dried up because there was no rain in the land. Right after that, verse 8 says the word of the Lord came to him. So as soon as Elijah was at his wit's end, as soon as he had no more water, as soon as he was at the breaking point that said, okay, I don't have anything else, God's voice came. Sometimes it's at that crisis point where you feel like, God, I can't do this anymore. God, I quit. God, I've tried the faith, I've tried the perseverance, I've tried the discipline. I'm at my wit's end. At that crisis point, that breaking point is sometimes when you hear God the most clear. Live one more day. Hold on one more day, because at that breaking point is when he heard God tell him his next move. We're 75% through the story. Stay with me. So he tells him to go to Zarephath. It symbolizes a place of refining or smelting furnace. It was also the center of Baal worship. So not only did God put Elijah through an isolation season, but now he's putting him through a refining season. So I am away from everything that I know, I'm by myself, and now you're gonna mold me, change me, all that. And if you feel like your season's extra tough, listen to this. Zarephath is a place of Jezebel, and Jezebel was on Elijah's neck. She was out to hunt him. So he takes Elijah from what he knows, and then he sends him to somewhere where somebody's at his head. God tells him that he commanded a widow to feed him. And again, faithfully, Elijah gets up and goes. Before Elijah even got inside the gate, the widow was standing at the gate waiting for him. That's what I consider the unseen hand of God. God will put you in a place where you don't even have to get all the way where you need to go before God shows you a sign that says, hey, I got you. If you think about it, the Jews and the Gentiles had beef. They're not cool. This widow is a Gentile. Already, Elijah is the most uncomfortable he could probably get. God was expressing to him that even if it's uncomfortable, even if I send you somewhere that's out of your comfort zone, I got you. Elijah asks her for a drink and bread. And she says, as the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. Right there, she's stating that she has faith. Right there, she's showing that she sees the God on Elijah. She's saying, I'm a widow. Number one, I don't have a husband. And number two, I'm trying to make it for me and my son. I don't have anything. How many of us know that God is attracted to the people that look like they don't have anything? The people that look like they're not going to make it. God favors the underdog. So Elijah tells her not to fear, to bring him the bread first and then go do what she needs to do. In short, Elijah tells her, don't worry about running out of stuff. God is going to supply all of your needs until he makes it rain again. And it says the jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. If I did my math right, for another year, they functioned off of this little amount of food and water that they had. God may not bless you with abundance right away, but he's always going to make sure you have what you need. Plot twist, everything's going good, and then suddenly her son dies. And she's like, what do you have against me, O man of God? You have come to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son. Now here, if you look at it from the surface level, she's looking at Elijah and she's blaming Elijah and she's blaming God. But if you look at it from emotions as a widow, she's actually saying everything that I've done wrong is coming to surface and I'm blaming myself. This poor woman is having a breakdown. I've been able to provide for my son this entire time, and here you come, everything looks good and great, and I have faith, and now my son is dead and my husband's been gone. Elijah takes the son and he actually goes to God and is like, God, this was not in the plan. I'm just following what you're doing. What is going on here? So he brings the little boy to God and he's like, please, like, put life back in him. And look at how Jesus plays too much, man. God knew that that little boy wasn't going anywhere but back to his mama. He was just applying the pressure in her life that says, I know that you need something tangible. You need a miracle that you can see with your own eyes so that you can go on and tell everybody and understand that I'm going to show up for you. So he allowed her to go through that, knowing that he was going to replace her son back to her anyways. But he had to apply that pressure so she could understand and have something that she could see to know that God has got her back. In the end, the woman said, now I know that you are a man of God and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth. God is going to separate you. God is going to develop you, but you have to take that step and trust him. Stop trying to take the cheap route. Stop trying to take the detour. Allow God to do what he needs to do in your season of isolation and preparation so that you can walk in who God has called you to be. Elijah, like I said, went on to do great things, but he had to be molded and developed first. So stop being scared of God preparing you for everything that he's called you to do. I know that life is hard and it's confusing, and this time in Elijah's life probably wasn't the most fun, but it was needed. You gotta stop putting God in this box that says if you don't do it the way that I think you should do it, it's too much for me. Strength is made perfect in our weakness, so those times where we feel isolated, that's when God shows up for us most. So I know that everything around you seems like it's moving a million miles a minute and yours is just paused. Trust God in that isolation season. Don't worry about it, but be thankful that you're going through it. Be thankful that God said that you're different. I have to isolate you and mold you so that you can do what I need you to do. Embrace the calling that God has on your life. Embrace the hard times. Embrace the isolation. Embrace building that relationship with God because you know that it's all for your good. God's got you always, and just like he did Elijah, he built him into exactly who he needed him to be, and God wants to do the same with you. Yeah, Elijah went through some things, but there wasn't one time in that story where God didn't show up for him. And he's the same God to Elijah, Moses, Joseph, everybody in the Bible that he is to you. You're precious and God's got you. Embrace it.